All right, we're actually recording. So most people have intros. I don't have an intro. I think I'm gonna ask my son to make me one though. But dude,
Yeah.
before we even start, last show I did with Joe Boca, and
Mm.
you've been on with him,
Yes.
and we started off the show goofing around about old Novus Ordo hymns, and I think I upset a few people.
Oh.
And it was not intentional in any way whatsoever. So it's like I can only speak from my own experience, but I grew up cradle Catholic.
Yeah.
Catholicism's in my DNA. Like I have 8 siblings, and it was literally like my dad. I was watching home videos of my dad the other day, and he's showing me at 9 years old. I got my first crucifix. These were some of the most amazing people you could ever meet in your life. So when I made those jokes, like it was never meant about the people that attend the Novus Ordo in any way whatsoever. I growing up, my father was friends with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and he had Father Stan Fortuna at our house. They would make music in the music studio. So right off the bat, I have to say that I was never trying to insult anybody that attends a Novus Ordo in any way. I think the Novus Ordo is a valid mass. There's Eucharistic miracles constantly. I just happened to transition toward traditional Latin mass, and
You went to the dark side. You went to the dark side. I'm a Novus Ordo diocesan TLM guy.
Yeah, that's what I go.
No,
I go to
yeah.
a diocesan. I go to a diocesan TLM
I
that
thought you were
also has an
I
Novus
thought you were a
Ordo.
society guy.
No.
No. Okay,
I
okay.
will
Yeah,
go. I will go every so often just to go see my friend Joe.
yeah. Yeah.
But it's we go to a diocesan TLM that we are in love with the parish. We're in love with the people.
Yeah.
It's one of the most. It's just one of the most beautiful liturgies I've ever seen in my life. I mean, we love it. And
but you upset people with the music.
Yeah, it's like I like my own parish has it. You have Jeremiah. First off, I should probably introduce you, right?
That's okay. No, just keep going.
Well, you know what it
no
is?
one needs to know. They'll figure it out.
I figure most people know who you are,
Yeah.
but I definitely have people that don't, because my family watches and my family has no idea anything about you. And that's why I do want to ask you about your story and stuff. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so it's like it was never ever meant in any way to denigrate anybody that attends a Novus Ordo. My sister's down in Wisconsin right now on a 1-year retreat with Spiritus, and she's actually doing retreats and helping young people convert. Like she's giving retreats to young people, and it's a Novus Ordo parish that she's doing it through, and it's like it was never meant in any way to upset anybody. Like it was just, me being me, and I tend to say silly things, but really people don't understand. My goal on here is really to I just want to become an influential source of disinformation is really
yeah.
But you're like a real broadcaster.
Yeah.
Like I watch your show and I watch you hit the post, and like people don't know what that means, but that like you'll put a rock song on and you'll know right when to turn it down to hit your post and come in and say exactly what's got to hit right at that right moment, But it's such a drastic contrast from what I do. I'm literally in my basement in the corner of a room with a laptop, and when I watch yours, I'm jealous.
But isn't that kind of the way things are rolling now? Like I'm dead serious. You can have people, and it used to upset me, because I'm like, I was on radio since I was like 15 years old, and I was spinning. I wasn't spinning records, right? But I'm old enough to remember when you would make commercials and you had this big magnet and you had to like put it over the cartridges with the metal stuff on the inside to clear it so that you could have a brand new commercial. And over
How
time,
old are you?
I'm almost 44 years old.
Really? You're basically my age. You're like a year, a couple of years older than me. But
yeah. So I'm like 44, but I'm old enough for that. I came in at the end of cassette tapes, and I was playing CDs. So, but my dad, when he first got on, is records. So I grew up in radio. Like I grew up in that. And so most of my life was dedicated. Like I lived there practically. And so, I saw my dad was a great host too. My dad was awesome. And
Did you always want to be a broadcaster?
since I was a kid. Yeah, I wanted to be a comedian when I was real little, but I told a very untimely joke about the astronauts and the explosion, and it was a Roy Rogers chicken.
Oh, that's something I would do.
It was the Roy Rogers.
The Challenger?
Yeah.
Oh man.
I was so young, dude. I didn't know any better. And I some joke like, where did they spend their summer vacation? All over Miami Beach, something like that. And this old man was really upset about it because it might have been like 2 or 3 months after. Like I didn't know any better, like nowadays.
I would do it on purpose.
Yeah. Well, or like now, if someone said it now, people would be like, well, you might have some really, patriotic souls to be kind of.
Well, it's like making a 9/11 joke on 9/12.
Yeah, that's essentially what happened. But dude, I was like real little, and this old man, he's like, that's not even funny. Where would you ever tell jokes like that? And I said, well, I want to be a comedian. And he's like, I hope you never become a comedian. And I'm like this little kid, So I was done with that. But my dad was in radio, so I remember going in the mornings, and it'd be like 4 a.m, you're waking up and stuff. And so I'd go down there and I'd lay downstairs while he's up there working his stuff. And I looked up and I remember one time I saw this poster on the wall and it was so cool, man. It had this guy on there. He looked all fancy, had a suit, and it had this yellow, real fancy though. I mean, it's weird to say yellow. It's more gold, like a gold tie. And he had this awesome cigar in his mouth. And his signature was this real loopy big signature that was in neon colors. And his name is Rush Limbaugh. And that was a young, but after the hyper obese Rush Limbaugh from TV days, which I used to watch that. Yeah. Right. I'm old enough. I was watching TV, Rush Limbaugh on TV. And so once I saw him on, the radio stuff, I was putting 2 and 2 together. He's the voice my dad would listen to in the car. It's like, I saw that. I was just going to say that.
So yeah. You're my brother Dominic's age. I'm born 82. You what, 78?
Yep.
So I started working with my dad when I was 17, and I got red pilled by Rush Limbaugh at 17, driving with my dad at lunchtime drive. He was on every day at 12, and that was my first, just exposure to conservative radio,
Yeah. And that same here, my dad, he had a 62 Caddy. So we were like always driving around in this mint condition Caddy, man. It was awesome. Just cherry ride, and like he'd have Rush Limbaugh cranked up, and so like we loved listening to it.
I don't care what anybody says. That man was a legend.
Oh, totally. And like it's one of those things where over the years I found myself increasingly disagreeing with him on different things, and it kind of ebbs and flows a little, right? I mean, like it depends on the situation and what America's going through and stuff, but but I always gave him credit where it's due and said, look, the guy, if it wasn't for him, how many of us wouldn't actually be doing what we're doing? I don't think we even know like how big of an influence that was.
Conservative conversations for so long. Like Rush would come on and then Hannity would mimic what Rush said right after, so Rush would literally set the tone. He always had original ideas. He always had original takes. I mean, he got very cliche with some things with the drive-by media and things like that, but he was very, he always set the tone, and he made his way during the Clinton years, right?
Well, that's when he really, really exploded, but I think he was around. I mean, he goes back quite a ways. I think he was even doing like rock and talk, because that's how I started. I would do rock music, and then actually I got started just playing Christian adult contemporary. Is because that's
you on an actual station? Like, did you have?
I was 14. I was 14 years old on a radio station. I was putting in music and stuff. I was 15 when I started talking into the mic. And it was on an AM station called, we called it Holy Woly, is WOLY. And the guy named it that because it's the closest thing to holy, which is really silly. But it was Holy Woly. And when we first got there, it was like all Southern gospel and like these old time preachers and stuff. And when my dad got there, he switched it over to adult contemporary, which was a really back in the 80s. Was
he the program director?
Oh yeah, he was the station manager.
He was the station manager.
Yeah, he was station manager. So he set the tone for all that. And people were mad you know, because that was early. That's like old school 1980s Christian music, like bands that people wouldn't even know, like DeGarmo and Key. Like they'd be like,
Yeah.
who's that? You know, or they might know like Petra. Like
So
they might, yeah.
dude, I am still nervous doing this. Like the first few videos I did, I was a nervous wreck. I did solo video. The first one I did, I deleted and re-recorded and deleted and re-recorded. I'm like, how? I've never had a higher respect for you guys that do this than I do now after trying to do it. It's not easy. Like I wanted to speak to you as one of my first guys because of the conversation we had on the phone, and I saw that there wasn't a second of silence between us. And I was like, I could let you carry the conversation for me. And I knew I could just throw a thing in here and there and you would carry the conversation for me, you know?
Well, that it happens in part because of radio. Like, you know, at least on a video, let's say that for a second we just paused.
Oh, dead air.
Like dead air just right now already. It took about a second, right?
I know, dead air scares me. No.
Yeah. But imagine at least they can see us.
Yeah.
So I mean, if I pause, I could pause and then be like, and move around, and even then, like it's still moving.
Yeah.
Whereas on radio, nobody can see that.
Yeah, dead silence is like the scariest thing in the world. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, man. I'm still nervous doing it. Like before we started tonight, I'm like, so like I did the only one I really wasn't nervous with was Joe, because I'm very good friends with Joe. Like I'll go and hang out with Joe, you know. So I didn't feel at all nervous with him. But my first interview with Flanders, he was the first guy I had on. I had Tim on. I interviewed about his book, and he had me wake up at 5 a.m. He's like, "We'll do it at 6 a.m." He's the morning dude. You're a night dude. I'm like, yeah, man. The drastic difference between you guys. And dude, when I tell you, I was so nervous. I woke up, and first of all, I drank like 2 cups of coffee, so I'm shaking like this. I'm like, it was so nerve-wracking. And then I don't like doing, so I started my first few shows with solo shows. I don't like doing solo shows now. I kind of like talking to someone, you know. I like the idea of just having a natural free-flowing conversation. Like even this, I have a few like bullet points I want to talk about, but like I didn't, my first few shows I scripted and I read to a T. Yeah. And it was like I would, and I tried to do a few where I was like, all right, let me try and wing it. And when I tried doing them by myself, I didn't know how to end the show. So I have like 5 shows recorded that'll never see the light of day because I got to what I wanted to say and then I didn't know how to end it. So they were just so over, and I was like, and I just didn't know how to tail out. I really should have just been like, well, all right, that's about it, guys. We'll figure it out next time. We'll go back on next time. I'm getting more comfortable with it as we go, you know?
Well, I tell people, I'm like, look, you know, truth is, if you just go around and you look at some popular stuff that people do, you'll find that there's all sorts of mistakes that people make. And if we're really serious about seeing how bad it is, get a piece of paper out and write down on the little margin there, put or any verbal pause you can think of, or repetition that sounds like it's nervous, like they're trying to scramble and they're repeating themselves.
You're filling time. That's a nervous tick.
And just go through and start doing little checks, and you'll find your paper's flooded, but you may never have noticed when you're watching the person.
Yeah.
You'd never notice because we're forgiving and we're there for the ultimate message. We're not there, you know, with a calculator counting the problems.
Where if you watch your own stuff, you will nitpick your own stuff. You'll be like,
oh yeah.
Oh, like I cannot rewatch something I record. I cringe at it. I'm like, my voice drives me nuts.
You got a cool voice. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You got a cool voice, man.
In my first few, I tried to hide my New York accent, and I'm like, let me just be me. What can I do? I can't pretend I'm somebody
else. Don't hide that. Dude, look, I was actually just talking about this recently about accents and stuff. I miss regional accents. And there are very few places I feel in America that have them so just in your face, right? Obvious as New York. Okay. Yeah. New York has got it. So, you know, my buddy, he's the Grand Canonist over on my Telegram channel, Anthony, and his accent's just super thick. Love it. My priest has an accent. You can only hear a little bit. He's traveled enough and he's lived away enough. But I was talking to my dad recently, and my dad was saying, you know, on the phone, he goes, he said, you know, he's going on a trip with my sister because my sister's got cancer, and it's looking pretty bad, actually. It's about, they're estimating anywhere from, you know, 1 month to 4 to 6 months at the most. And so she's pretty spooked, right? But she's still moving forward. And my dad was like, he really wants to take her on a ride on his motorcycle because he's got this cool bike. And it's a thing of Valkyrie, and he wants to take her from Michigan down to, I think, DC area or something like that. But he said the phrase, he said, I want to take her on a motorcycle, and we'll probably go through Pennsylvania. And he said it just like me, right? We have similar accents. And I said, say it again. And I said, say, I rode on a motorcycle to Pennsylvania. And he said, well, I rode on a motorcycle to Pennsylvania. And I said, dude, have you ever gone back to 1984 to listen to yourself on that old game show, Press Your Luck? Because he was a contestant. Oh yeah, he was a contestant, and he rode his motorcycle. And let me try my best. He said, yeah, my name's Tim Bannister. I rode my Goldwing motorcycle, 2,100 miles from Pennsylvania to California. That's what he sounded like.
I tell you,
it's totally different now.
It's funny. So my older brother, who's your age, was on Survivor season 36.
Oh, yeah.
Season 36. Jeremiah, he made it to the final three. The first time in history this happened. The final three, my brother and another guy tie. It's the first time it happened, and the third person had to break the tie. My brother won 100K. He was one vote away from $1 million.
What?
Do you understand? What? So he came home and he couldn't tell any of us. So he filmed it. He was gone for like 48 days. He comes home and he could not tell any of us what happened for 7 months until the show aired. Okay. We watched that show fresh. We didn't know if he won or lost. We see him every week doing better. We thought my brother won $1 million. Like, it was one of the most exciting times for my family. We rented out a bar in the town that I live in, and we got 150 people every Wednesday night when Survivor was on. Everybody in the town knew my brother was on it. I had friends calling me that I hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Like, dude, your brother's on TV. This is amazing. It was literally one of the most exciting times. But my brother hid his New York. He is so good in front of a camera, man. We were also worried he was going to embarrass us. He was so cool. Yeah. My brother, I was so proud that my brother was on TV, but he did a really good job of hiding his accent, man. It was a wild time.
Yeah, my dad did not. He did not. He was cool, and he also only came home with like a lamp and some Nestle chocolate chips or something. He lost pretty badly. It was
You mentioned your sister, whose name is Phoebe, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Now, I wanted to get you on because what's going on in my family right now is my youngest brother. So I'm one of 9, and my youngest brother is having a lot of things going on right now, health-wise, and the doctors can't figure out what it is. And through him going through this crisis, I mean, he's been off of work. He's been he was really terrified at one point, but he had a conversion during this time. And he had mentioned to my mother that he felt bad, like he felt guilty that it took a crisis like this to bring him to faith. Because like I was saying before, I'm a cradle Catholic. The faith, I still believed in God. I didn't always take my faith seriously, and I didn't always know the Catholic faith, but I always believed in God. I'm pretty sure my brother was the same way, but he had a conversion in the past month where he's studying his. And there's nothing more exciting than when a family member has a conversion. It's and I know that you had mentioned, and I'm only saying this publicly because you did, that your sister's husband is still not there yet.
Yeah,
and you have gone through some of the most unbelievable suffering of anybody I've ever known. And I was trying to explain to my brother that God will use suffering to bring us to him.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's just, you're better off in crisis mode leaning on him than having everything going fine and thinking you're good on your own.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that you could maybe just give a little bit of your backstory and explain. I feel bad because I know you've told the story a bunch of times, but I know a lot of people that watch my show don't know your story.
It's okay. Yeah, I'm writing a book about it right now. So like,
Okay.
I mean, I'm almost done. I said I'd be done on the 24th. I don't know if that is going to happen. If it does, it'll be like technically the 24th, but it'll be like the 25th at like 5 a.m, and I'm letting and I'll be letting Tim know it's done. He's like, "Did you sleep?" No, but I'm finishing the book. And it's written like a story, right? It's biographical, it's truthful, but not everything is factual. And part of that is just the necessity of trying to tell a coherent story that is part of a life that spans, let's say 4 years or so. And it involves about a bazillion different people because it's an awesome kid with cancer and everything. And so you're going to get a lot of people. And so you got to kind of sum it up and everything. But, let me say this first, man, about the suffering thing. I was writing recently. I was trying to figure out kind of where I wanted to go with toward the end of the book and stuff. And there's a scene where I go up and I'm looking at this chessboard, and I hadn't gone up to the attic since my daughter died, since the day she died. That I was upstairs after she died. We brought her out to the car and out to the hearse in the road because she died at home. And I go upstairs and I'm with my friend, and I'm like so traumatized. I'm not even in reality. And he told me, I was telling him, she really died. She really died. And he says, it's on video. He said, we have a video of that. And I said, what? And so I had him show me. And it was like where it hits you that it's real. You're watching yourself do that, carrying her body and saluting as she goes away. And it was so traumatic in that moment. I told him, I said, you got to go. I said, I'm sorry, please leave. And I was like screaming. He's bawling. He's like, I'm so sorry, dude. I love you, man. And he's leaving. And I'm just like thrashing around on the floor. I'd laugh and then fall down. I'm like, not even in reality. Well, I stopped going up there because it's traumatizing,
Yeah.
And so that used to be a special place. Like we used to have our a tradition of on the weekends where we'd get together, all the kids, and we'd put blankets and pillows out, and we'd watch old Super Friends cartoons from the 70s and stuff. So it was a lot of fun. We called it pillow blankets, but we no longer did it up in the attic, right? It was done. And there's a scene though where after she's gone and after I'm kind of coming back to the faith and everything, that I face that attic and I go up there and I see, all the stuff as it was. And and everything's static, right? Everything's kind of where it was when last time I was there, except for the chessboard. The chessboard was the last game of chess I was playing with my daughter. And I noticed that pieces had moved. And I could just imagine that it was my children, who went up there. They were being all sneaky and they thought it'd be fun to make this ridiculously impossible position for me to play. And they did, right? It was like, I'm thinking of as many avenues to get out of this as humanly possible. And every one of them, 3 moves, 4 moves down the line, checkmate every time. And it was nothing I could do. And I remember I sat there and I was frustrated because they played around, because they changed the board.
The board from the last game you played with your
from
daughter.
The last game I played with my daughter. And I remember I was so frustrated by it. And then all of a sudden I kind of laughed a little and I thought it's actually a lot like how it really played out with God with this, is because, my kids really made a major change in my life. They're the ones who ultimately led me back to the Lord, were my kids, and not just my daughter. It was them. And it was things that they did that took me off guard. And I remember at the end, I'm saying it all for this, is that I remember kind of smiling, accepting this. And I knocked my king to the board. And I said to myself, sometimes you got to lose to win. And I walk out. It's okay when you go through hard times to realize that, to throw yourself at God. And to say, I know people say you shouldn't just do that when you're down. And that's true, right? If you're only going to God when you are in pain or hurting, you should evaluate the reasons for that.
Yeah.
But it's better you do that than not at all. It's better you throw yourself at the feet of the Lord and say, I'm casting my cares on you, and I'm really struggling and I need help, than it is to simply say, not only am I not doing it when things are going good, but even when things are bad, I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps kind of
Yeah.
guy. God's not down with that. You're halfway there, right? If you go when you're sad, you're halfway there.
Yeah.
So I encourage them in that and say, don't fret it, do it more. And in the meantime, think of why you don't do it in other situations.
How many years has it been since your daughter passed?
She passed in 2015. So it was during the 2016 election.
So
Right.
you had
So,
all that madness going on while this was going on.
oh, dude. Yeah.
Madness in the world and madness at home.
Yeah, she liked Donald Trump, though.
Yeah. Well,
She did.
her
She liked
father's
Donald
daughter.
Trump. Yeah. She liked Donald Trump. And she liked listening to him. And it's kind of funny, a little, maybe a little telling, but she said that she liked listening to him when she went to sleep because it was like, how did she say it? It was like sing song. She said his voice has like a sing song sound. She goes, and it really helps put me to sleep.
So now, how old was she when she got sick?
She got sick. She got sick at 10 years old.
And what year was this? This was 2012 or 2013?
Yeah, 20. Well, she only lived for 16 months.
Once she got sick.
So I mean, yeah,
so it was like 2013.
Yeah, so it'd been 2014, 2014.
Okay.
Yeah, now, 16 months because it was March 2014.
And now,
and
where
then she
were
died
you
in
at?
July.
Where were you at spiritually when you first heard your daughter was sick?
Oh, I was a raging anti-theist. I mean, I was doing speeches on. I had a speech called "Cutting Through Catholicism: Counter Apologetics from the Inside Out."
So now
I was bashing God on radio.
You have a wild story because I mean, we don't have to get into all of it because I'm sure people have heard it. You started off atheist or agnostic, and then you became you went like Pentecostal, right?
No, long story short, raised Pentecostal charismatic, became a Calvinist in college, was convinced of Catholicism after when I was a pastor because I got done with college and started doing pastoring, and became a Catholic. Then I apostatized, right? And that wasn't just like right away. I didn't go from being Catholic to atheist. I actually became a sedevacantist, and then fell away from that.
So now, while you were in your Catholic phase, you were naming all your children Catholic saints' names.
Yeah. So and it came back to get me, right? Because the ones who remained, Samantha was the only one. That's my eldest. That's the one who died. She's my firstborn, and her name was Samantha Lee. Mm-hmm. But after that, it was Isaac Athanasius, and we call him Athan. We just call him Athanasius. Ambrose Lewis, Teresa Avila Lucille, and since Samantha passed, we've had two more. We have Lucian Ignatius and Wolfgang Phoenix. And so
I was actually I was just talking to my kids before, and they're like, "Who are you talking to?" I was like, "Oh, I'm talking to my friend Jeremiah." I'm like, and something came up, and they were asking something, and I was like, and I was telling them your kids' names. I was like, "Yeah, I think his youngest son's name is Wolfgang," and they were like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah." So, okay, so now you have your. It's 2014. You are away from the faith, not just away from the faith. Militant atheist at this point.
Yeah.
You fell away. I mean, when you say fell away, you fell away.
I was it wasn't quick. I mean, it was, even for months after I stopped going to church, I still had that thing where, like, you believe in God, but you're not living that way at all.
I have gone through a few periods of my life like that.
Yeah. And like people would get into arguments, and it was weird. I could be like super high or drunk drunk and high, right? I'm both at the same time. And I'm sitting there and debating somebody about Catholicism or whatever, like it was kind of a crazy thing. And I had a lip ring, a nose ring, super long hair. And, I went to an SSPX ordination and I took pictures and stuff. And I was there with a lip ring and a nose ring. I was the only guy, number one, taking pictures. They actually were encouraging you not to. By encouraging, they were saying, don't take pictures. But I did. So I was a journalist. I'm like, I'm going to take pictures. But so I was kind of in that phase though. But during that time, something finally clicked in a bad way. And I started just raging against God. And so, talking about how if God was real, he was evil. And if God was real and really as they described, then I was better than God, like on a moral level.
Like you would be a better God than he was.
That I was a better human than God was a God.
Yeah.
That I said, look, at least I wouldn't, flood the earth and kill everybody. I mean, and there is an aspect where people, a lot of modern people, they like to think of like Jesus as like the cotton candy God and stuff, right? Passing out lemon drops and lollipops at a parade and everything. And so like, it's part of the apologetic that was popular for so long about the all good and all loving God. And we've emphasized that. But the atheist could just look back and say, look, he flooded an earth with people.
Yeah.
And we can say, well, there's a lot of bad people at the time. And you go, yeah, but do you think there weren't like pregnant women?
Yeah.
You think there were babies inside there? Like, what was it, just that nobody had babies or what? Like, and so it's a punishment that dealt with everybody.
Tear our arguments apart if you go that route.
If you go that route, right? Yeah. So I was basically saying, look, and I would never tell a guy to kill his kid to prove he loves me. That was my logic.
Yeah, the Isaac story, right?
Yeah. And so I just went to town and said, oh yeah, no, I would never do that. That's barbaric. So that led, and I scared my wife. My wife told me.
I was just about to ask you, what is going on with your wife during this time?
Oh, dude, scared. Yeah. She told me straight to my face. She goes, Jeremiah, you're really scaring me. Like big time. She's like, I don't know why.
You're not the same man you are.
You're not the same man. Yeah. But she loved me.
Yeah.
And so like, no matter where I went, she followed. There were certain things where she's like, I can't go down that. I can't do that. But she stopped going to church, and we just all did it.
That's the thing you have to understand as a man, because every time I lost my faith, for me, every time I lost my faith, it was preceded by me stopping going to the sacraments.
Yeah.
So I stopped going to the sacraments. I missed mass a couple of weeks in a row, and then a few old habits pick up. And then before you know it, I'm back to my old ways. Mm-hmm. Now, when I am not the spiritual father of my home, the whole family follows where I go. So that's every man has to understand that your family is going to follow your lead wherever you go. So now you're 2014, you're in this place. Your wife is really seeing a dark side of you she hasn't seen. Mm-hmm. And then you get the news your daughter is sick.
Yeah.
Take me that way.
Well, what happened was, and it's like one of these weird things, man, where there are like little signs that happen, but you can attribute them to other things. And in fact, it's more reasonable to attribute them to other things, right? Like I've got a cough. I've had a cough for a couple of weeks. My daughter had a cough and she still has it. And she's on like week 3 or whatever. Some people could say, maybe you've got throat cancer, right? Is it possible? I guess. Is it likely? No. Right. But it's better to not think that first, right? It's better to like slowly, incrementally make your way up.
What were the first signs?
The first signs for my daughter were she was skating, and because she loved roller skating and she was really good at it. So we're at the rink, and and I was a DJ at the time, so that I DJ on the weekends so they could skate for free. So I was there and doing the fast skating stuff, and she's going around, and she's rocking it out, dude. And I'm always really proud, I'm watching her, she's doing so great, and all of a sudden, man, boom, she just like trips. And it was this really funky thing. And actually, when I saw her when she was going around, her arm was kind of like up at a weird angle. Like she would always hold her arm out, kind of like ice skaters do. When they're going real fast, they get their arm kind of out. Well, hers was like kind of crick like this. And it was a funky looking thing. It reminded me of these little birds that died. They were in a nest at our house. And I came home one day, and I don't know if it's chipmunk or what, knocked it down. And these little birds were on the ground, man. These little baby birds. And it had a broken wing. And I looked at it, and I thought, that was like a little wing broken kind of thing. Well, that was that same day. She's skating around, and she falls. But I don't understand why. She gets back up, and she starts to skate again, and she falls again. And the second time she fell, she looked at me, and the terror in her face. And she just said, Papa, like as loud as she could. And I'm like the DJ, homie. I hop over the thing. I'm like, whoosh, and I'm like busting out there like something's wrong. She would never yell up to me during songs playing everything. People are still skating. So I run out and I don't even make it over. I barely get over that little doorway thing. I hop over that. I barely get past it. And dude, she just grit her teeth. She stood up, man. You could just tell it was like fire. And she just, and she went booking again. And she ended up coming back, took like second place. I didn't even she was that fast. Like, so she fell twice, cries for help, and still makes it. So I'm thinking, okay, whatever, right? Well, she ends up having a bruise on her leg. And she said it was weird because she couldn't feel it. She's like, and it was big. And I'm like, well, holy cow. I'm like, look at that bruise. And she goes, oh, it doesn't hurt at all. I'm like, what? It was on her right leg. But then I started noticing that she had a limp. And I looked at it, but it was that same leg, the right leg. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm like, she's got a little bit of a limp. I'm like, are you okay? She's like, yeah, I'm fine. I said, why are you doing that with your leg? And she goes, doing what? And I'm
She
like,
didn't even notice.
Didn't even notice, no, because it wasn't to do with the pain. And so I was just like, well, she's got a big bruise. She fell down. We'll keep an eye on it. Well, then she ended up going to the eye doctor like the next day. Went to the eye doctor. The eye doctor was like, look, there's nothing wrong with her eyes. She has no damage, but her right eye, it's like it's not dilating the right way. And so when you go, you should schedule an appointment, talk to the doctor, find out what's going on with the eye, kind of thing like that. He's like, because he's flashing light and it's not dilating right. And he's kind of looking at it funny and doing it again. So we set up an appointment with the doctor. And that night, my daughter tells me that she wants to show me something. And I said, well, what do you want to show me? And she said, I learned how to write with my left hand. Now I'm ambidextrous because I was born with two thumbs on one hand. So like when I was born, I was like this, right? And so I can't really move my thumb very much. As far as I can move, it's weird. It's funky.
Yeah.
So I found myself naturally just using both hands when I was young. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. So she gets my favorite pen, a bunch of journals. She brings one of them over and she's showing me, and it's like super amazing. It's beautiful. And I said, why'd you do that? And she said, because I can't write with my right hand anymore. And I look at her like, I mean, you just got to imagine being happy and everything's normal. And then all of a sudden you're hearing like, what are you talking about? And you don't know, it's like funny, but not like, you don't know if it's serious, like what's happening. And she goes, I can't write with my right hand anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, well, I try, but I started doing bad on my homework and it was taking me too long. And my teacher told me that I was falling behind. And so she was a straight A student. So she said, so I was trying to write faster, but then the teacher told me my handwriting was really sloppy. So I decided I was just going to do it with my left hand. And I'm sitting there and my first thought is, how long has this happened? And she said, about 2 weeks. And I said, I said, show me. I didn't even say, why didn't you tell me? I said, show me, because I didn't even believe her. I didn't believe she would do this. So I told her to show me. She gets out a notebook and she sits it down and she starts writing. And dude, I could tell. Now I was mad, right? But I could tell that there was a problem because she took the pen with her left hand and put it in her hand. She couldn't just grab it. She took it, put it in her hand, and it's like this, right? And you could see her fingers, dude, her fingers were like, they were all moving in a funky way, like if something was wrong. And she's trying, and all of a sudden she's like trying really hard, and it drops. And I reach over and I grab it and I pull it over. And dude, this is like the most, there's things that as a parent, sometimes we regret. And then there's things like this. I looked at it and it was chicken scratch, homie. It was nothing but just gobbledygook nonsense. And I told her, I said, that's not your handwriting. And I pulled out, I had my wallet in my pocket. I took out my wallet and I'd been carrying a letter that she wrote me for like 2 years. I carried it everywhere. If I ever had a down day, that's what I looked at. I'd open it up and I'd read this thing because she believed in me. She believed in what I did. She thought I was funny. She
I'm gonna have
loved
a
my
hard time
work.
getting through this, Jeremiah.
What's that?
I'm gonna have a hard time getting through this.
Well, believe me, you can. You will. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it, Anthony. Because this is what happened. This is how I learned. Okay. So I shoved it back over to her. And I said, "This is your writing." And I pointed at this paper. I took out the paper, slammed it down, and I was angry. And I pointed and I said, "You show me." I said, "You show me right now." I said, "That's your handwriting." I said, "Show me." And she's like, "Yes, Papa." And she picks this thing up. She's 10, dude. She picks this thing up and you can tell like she's shaking. She puts it in her hand, starts doing it again, and she's biting her lip like all over, like trying so hard.
Because she doesn't want you to be upset with her.
She doesn't want to fail, dude. She doesn't want to fail me. She doesn't want to fail me and make me sad. So she's trying, and dude, she drops it. She could not hold it, and it hit the table. And at that moment, I like looked at her, and she goes, "I'm so sorry, Papa." And she said she was sorry. And I look at her, dude, and she's got tears, dude, just coming down her face. And like, I remember, dude, and this is weird, man. I don't know how often I've ever said this part, but like, I remembered like in that moment when she was a kid, like baby. I used to think like, cause man, like sometimes kids will cry, but they get to an age where it's like not real crying.
Yeah.
And you can tell.
Yeah.
And you're like, wah, wah. Like, I know you're fake crying. Well, like there was a day she was doing that. And I thought so. And she was crying real bad. And I remember I walked her in to her room. I'm like, you're gonna go to bed. You're just being, you won't stop crying.
And you hadn't been to any doctors at this point.
No, this is when she was a baby. I'm saying when she's a baby.
Okay.
It reminded me the tear.
Yeah.
The tear in that moment when she dropped that pen.
Yeah.
That tear was like a flashback, dude, to this time when she was a baby. And I thought she was not
putting it on.
I thought she was putting it on. And I remember sitting her down. And when I did, I noticed, dude, she had cut herself. There was blood. And she was crying. And I looked at her face and it was real tears. And I remember I was like, oh my gosh, they're real tears. And dude, I like held her and I ran in the other room. And at that moment, I knew, I'm like, she's not lying, dude. And then it hit. And I said, right arm, this thing, right hand, right leg, she can't feel, right eye.
Left side of the brain.
Left side of the brain. I did not know cancer. And I think that's like one of those things where parents just, like if you talk to them and they're not in that moment, they would say like what you said, it'd be like, at least it's on the table. But when you're in that moment, cancer's like not in your mind. Like you suppress that. And it was so bad. I remember that same night we went to the hospital. They did an MRI. And I remember walking by and I saw this. We have an amazing children's hospital here. And there was this big poster of this kid. He's all happy, like smiling. And it said ranked in the top 20 children's hospitals in 3 different specialties by, U.S. News and World Report or something. It was like urology, nephrology, I think, I don't remember, and cancer. And I remember looking at it, and I took a picture, and I shared that picture that night, and I wrote how terrible it'd be for parents who find out that their kids have cancer, and that we're so fortunate to have a place like this. And about 6 hours later, they told me that she had an anaplastic astrocytoma in her brain. An anaplastic astrocytoma is simply a very, very wicked kind. All cancer is wicked bad. But some of them are so bad that kids die so fast that you can't do studies. It's hard to do studies because they just die so fast. And the reason why is because the cells in your brain that kind of, for the blood-brain barrier, stuff like that protect you, God made them really cool. And they're like in the shape of a star. And I've always imagined like that it's like energy, right? Like shooting through these stars in all the 5 directions. And they're all kind of networked together to create this amazing shield. those cells are the cancer. There is no shield. The shield for these kids is the sword. So there's nothing. You are just at the behest of cancer.
Yeah.
And so I learned that. The next day, but that's how I found out. And one other thing is there was about a little while where she was like vomiting. And that's actually why we brought her to see the eye doctor, was because she was having headaches real bad. And she was complaining about headaches, but she was reading all the time. And I have glasses. My wife has glasses.
She thought maybe
so like,
it was her eyes.
I thought it was her eyes. And then she got sick, but I was sick too. So I'm puking and she's puking. So we both were like, well, hey, why don't we just, we enjoyed the whole week. We enjoyed being sick, watching cartoons on the same bed, eating ice cream, drinking 7-Up, whatever. Right. We were both doing it. And I got better and she didn't. And so each one of those things, like talking about it now and putting it together as a package, it's like, well, yeah, okay, look at that. But in the moment,
yeah, there's things lining up that make you just kind of want to, and plus optimism bias.
Oh yeah,
optimism bias. Like, no, not us, not our family. I mean, that's got to be. So now, how old are your other kids at this time?
The other kids are.
She's 10.
Yeah, she's 10. And so my son Athen was like 8. It's basically like 8, 6, and 5, because my daughter the next year was in kindergarten. So the first year, no school. So because it was March when she went in. My daughter, we went into the hospital like a week before my birthday.
Now, do they have any understanding of what's going on with their sister?
Well, to the degree they can, and in part because I made a commitment to my family, and part of me encourages everybody to do this. Part of me knows why not everybody could. But when I decided early on, I said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not, I have a certain skill set. I can write, I can talk. And I said, I can tell the story. And I said, but I'm going to be honest with my daughter about this, because I knew people who it kind of is like, they struggle with the birds and the bees, right? I mean,
well, you don't know how they're going to handle it, so you think you're going to hide the prognosis from them, I guess, right? You want to protect them as best you can. I mean, that's your instinct, is to protect them, but
yeah. So you're wanting to protect them, and yet at the same time, you need to be honest with them. And she was a super smart girl, man. Like, she was like sagacious in some ways, like almost visionary type stuff. Weird. There was weirdness about her that she was way ahead of the curve, even on stuff like death. And there were eerie conversations when you talk to little kids and they're talking to you, and it's like, whoa, that's actually like it's a pretty deep thought you've got here at 5 years old or 6 years old, and unsettling maybe a little, but that's who she was. And so the idea of not telling her was kind of crazy, because I knew they're going to cut her hair. She's going to have brain surgery, man. And I go through chemo, so it's going to happen. And I said, but I'm going to tell her if it's not working, I'm going to be honest, and we're going to talk about questions to do with death. We're going to talk about life. We're going to talk about quality and quantity of life. And I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen to her, because she's at an age where to her, it is her life. And it's not just, that the factual matter of it's her body, but I mean that she understands.
Now, what do you believe at death at this time?
At that time, well, it's like one of these things where, like, on the one hand, I let me just be really clear about this first. I don't think that there are any true blue atheists in the world.
Yeah,
I don't
atheists in the foxholes, the saying, right?
Well, not even just in the foxholes of their own mind. That they're created in the image of God. They're created in the likeness and image of God. God's law is imprinted upon their hearts. They have a conscience. They live and move and have their being in a world of God's design. They suppress that truth for a lie and establish and rise up in its place idols of the natural world. So an atheist person is a person who knows better and is suppressing the truth. Nobody's going to go before God on Judgment Day and go, I was just looking at the evidence and there was no evidence of you.
My thing is, they say we believe in our spaghetti monster in the sky, right? That's the atheist cliche that they say. I say it's not us who is pretending there's a God. You're pretending there's no God.
Yeah.
You're pretending, you know, there's one, and you're pretending there's not.
Yeah.
So you're, I mean, you could, that's why I can honestly say I was never an atheist. So you're at this point, words are saying there's no God, but now you're faced with
now I'm faced with dealing with what I suppress. But that's a powerful thing, man. Suppression. My best friend died, and it wasn't enough for me to pray. He was in an accident, right? Ended up dying of a car accident. It was really terrible. And he was my best friend for years, and I never prayed. And then now I'm with my daughter, and everything inside of me was there was a part of me that was hoping almost that it's just simply, you know, that we wake up in this world. We didn't, you know, we don't even remember the moment we opened our eyes. Our first memories are years after we opened our eyes, most people. And so, you know, we didn't ask to be born. We don't even remember being born. We just show up into this weird universe, right? And then at the end we close our eyes and we're back. And my goal was to make the interim period of time as happy and as healthy as I could. And I said, I am limited to that. But it for me anyway, it quickly turned into an agnosticism, like an admitted agnosticism that says, you know, I don't know. Because originally it was just this really hard line. No, God's a joke. There's no God. There's no afterlife.
Yeah, because we think we're going to live forever.
We do. Yeah. And it's easy to say that when you're riding high on the hog of health, right? In your life. It's different all of a sudden when you're looking down the scope of a kid with cancer and they're saying they love you.
Or even my brother in his situation where he can't figure out, oh my gosh, why is this happening? He knows his own body and something's going on.
Right.
So
exactly. And that's how it was with this. So like I was to the point, dude, where I was willing to admit that I didn't know, in part because she told me. She would confront me about this because we talked, and she had doubts, man, about a lot of things. It confused her. For example, why people would pray that God would bless their food when they were eating like an all you can eat or Taco Bell and, you know, a big chug of Coca-Cola. And they're like, God bless this food, you know? And she's like, God wouldn't do that. Like, you know, well, even to her, you know, and she was baptized and for a couple of years was in church, but she was really little when that happened. So everything she really understood about it was through her friends who were all religious, or through my parents and her aunt and uncle and stuff like that, because we're the only atheists. And so she knew stuff, but it was.
Oh, were you raising the kids atheist?
Oh yeah, dude. None of them went to none of them went to church. None of them went.
But like, were you openly talking about that kind of stuff, or you would just like? Because there's some people who, like, my daughter has a friend whose family they teach their kids atheism, and then you have other kids who they just don't talk about it at all, and they say, "Oh yeah, there's a God." They won't, you know, they're not religious, but they say there's a God. You know, there's a difference there. You know what? Let's take a pause and enjoy that. I'm going to edit this clip out.
Yeah. Don't do it. Just keep that part in where you said you're going to edit it out. You did that with Joey. Yeah. You're like, oh, I'll edit it out. I'm watching it. I do that all the time. Some sedevacantists are not getting it. Like they don't understand.
We have to do that. We have to, I don't want to edit this out. I want this to be part of it. We're going to get into this. So let's go back.
Okay.
Where did we leave off? What were we saying?
With my daughter and atheism and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I want to talk to you about sedevacantism.
Yeah, well, I taught. So I'll say this. I taught. I didn't teach my kids atheism. At least I didn't say that I did.
Okay.
I would say
that's exactly where we were. So
but that's fake though.
Right.
Even people who say that they don't. If you're there is no neutrality. Like this idea of neutrality is garbage. So if people say, well, I just don't raise my kids with reference to any God, I'm like, functional atheism. That's what it is. If you have no reference to God, you're a functional atheist. That's it. So I don't, and if they say, well, I'm an agnostic, you say it's functionally, you're still an atheist. It doesn't matter.
So I lived as an atheist for a very long time.
Even though a lot of people do.
Deep down, I knew there was a God. I lived as though there was no God.
Well, and I think I go even further, and my argument is that I'm not even talking to an atheist. I'm talking to an idolater. And we need to. I think that people play into their hand if we allow them to dictate the terms. That we say, well, read the opening chapters of the Book of Wisdom. Those are godless people, but what are they? They're idolaters.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
feel like when we say idolaters, like I don't like when we call what's going on today paganism, because pagans had culture and we don't have culture. So for anybody wondering, I don't know where I'm going to edit out, but me and Jeremiah went on a half-hour tangent just now. I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm
Yeah.
putting back in the show. I
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
watch this later,
Yeah.
but we're going to get back into how he was. That's where we are
Yeah.
now. Or
So,
I
but
don't.
I'm only saying the idolater thing, not as getting into an apologetic and referring to them the whole time as idolaters, but I'm saying internally with fellow Catholic people to reorient people to realize that when you have an atheist person, that's not a neutral person. That's a creature in the image of God,
Mhm.
living in God's universe with
Worshiping another god.
worshiping something else, and whether it's the self, whether it's nature, whatever they want to put in there, they have exalted something higher than God, and they've suppressed God for a lie. That's all I mean.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I agree
atheist people,
100%.
so I would talk about it all the time, but I never like sat down and said, okay, get notes out. We're gonna do this. I raised them. They all understood the arguments. They all understood my reasons. They were always around me. I was on radio talking about it, speeches. I was on a board for an atheist
Yeah, and that's
organization.
what I was asking. So
Yeah.
they knew
Yeah.
that you felt this way. It wasn't something you kept from them. You were openly speaking about this in the home.
Oh yeah, big time.
Okay.
Every day. And so were all the people around me, because I was surrounded, even though I was never a fan of activism per se, I was always around people who were activists, and their whole life, every conversation. I mean, you couldn't hardly talk about anything without somehow some anti-theistic thing coming up, you know. And so no matter who it was in my life, we did have a couple of friends who were Christian, but not very many. And most of them were friends we had for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Who would love you through no matter what phase you are in your life.
And they're still here now.
Yeah.
And sadly, the atheists are not. And it's one of the, it's weird, you know, because when I was an atheist, most
pray for them
Christians,
because they may come back in later.
well, that's my hope. Yeah.
So, okay, so now your daughter's sick and you bring her to the hospital, you find out she has, what is it, a tumor?
Oh yeah,
So she has a tumor on the left side of her head, the size of a golf ball.
Yeah,
Now,
it's
what do
down
they
in
tell
the
you?
spine.
What do they tell you is the prognosis?
Well, they gave me a book, and it's a big book of cancer, and it has all different kinds. And they said, don't read the other kinds, just read anaplastic astrocytoma. So I did, and I mean, we're talking, I think it's like 70 something percent of them die in like 2 years, 2.5 years. And most of them die most of the remainder would die within 5 years. So there's very few people that had an astrocytoma as a kid. Now I know at least one or two that had that as a kid, and they have been in remission for 10 years. So I've met some, but most of them do not. And it kind of depends on how aggressive that particular one might be, you know. It kind of depends on like where it is in the brain, how receptive it is to radiation. Now we were fortunate enough to have that um she did really well with radiation, and so it melted it. And and I was open at the time when I saw that. I was like, how frequent is this? And I was open. There was a couple times where I wondered if it was miracles. Like it
You
was
were
still in my
hopeful.
head, where
Yeah.
I'm at least open to the idea that this is maybe miraculous, right? And that was one of them. But yeah, the life expectancy for kids with that is not high. I mean, right away they're talking to you about quality of life, like right away. Yeah.
So now, what is the first event that I know your daughter had a few. All right, so just take me through the story. You know how to tell it the best, right? So now, okay, so now she's sick,
Yep.
and you're finding all this out. What happens next?
Well, we had to go to radiation. We had to go to chemo. I mean, that's like right out of the gate. It was one of these things, and when your daughter's going through this, and she was having these things called hypothalamic storms, and they're kind of like they look almost like seizures, kind of. It's extremely terrifying to the child or the adult, but it's not a seizure. And it's basically the activity in your brain is it's like fireworks, boing, 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 boing. And you feel it coming on, it's going to happen. And when it does, it's terror. And she was having them over and over and over. And I remember the doctors couldn't figure it out. They were struggling to figure it out. And it went on for days, and it got worse and worse and worse. And there was a moment where my wife was so tired, and she'd been awake. We've been awake for like weeks and weeks, dude, just, all day, every day going, living on caffeine, basically. And she's sitting there and she's laying down, and she was trying to get to sleep for the first time. And my daughter is just screaming, and she's like, "Papa, please help me." And she's holding my hand. And I looked down at my wife, and she was weeping, dude. And she's looking at me with so much shame, but she went like this, and she put the blanket. She could not, it was the end. It was a limit.
For
And
your wife?
for my wife.
She could. Was it because she could? I mean, I can't do.
Because there's nothing you can do.
You can't help.
You
You're
cannot
helpless.
help. You cannot. There's nothing. And she hit a wall. And now she, as I said, she'd been awake for days. So she's sitting there, and in other words, it was her shutting down. She can't do it. And so I'm alone. And I remember I went out to the door, man, and we're in this big children's hospital. We're in a certain floor. Dude, I opened that door right up, man. It was like 2 a.m. I opened that door right up. The nurse on the outside's like, "Mr. Bannister, can you please close that door? Your daughter is screaming." I said, "Oh, no." I said, "I'm not closing it." And she's like, "Well, there's people sleeping." I'm like, "I know." And she's like, "But they're not going to be able to sleep." And I said, "I'm sure they won't be." And I'm like, "Until you get a doctor in here that can do something, I ain't moving." I said, "You want to move me? Go get security." I said, "I'm not moving." I said, "You need to address this. It's gone on for a week, and it's getting worse and worse and worse." So a dude comes in, and he's in scrubs, dude. He's not a doctor. He'd been in there. He's a nurse. Homeboy comes in, and he's like, "Okay." He's like, you can shut the door now." And I said, "You a doctor?" "No." I said, "Then that door stays open, dude." I said, I ain't playing. I said, "This is like a hostage situation." I said, you let the hospital know that your boy is standing here, and I'm not going to let anything happen." I said, "People are going to start coming out of the room. They're going to start coming out." I said, "You want to move me? I'm standing at attention, dude. I'm here for my daughter." And I said, "I have to advocate for her." He's like, "Well, there's nothing I can do." I said, "Can you get meds?" "Nope." I said, "Well, who can? Doctor." I said, "Then you call him." He's like, "It's like 2:30 a.m. And I said, "Well, that's unfortunate, because he's going to wake up." I'm like, you ain't going to convince me to stop, bro. You got the wrong guy if you think that's what's going to happen. And so he's like looking, and you can tell he's terrified. He's terrified. But he sat there, and he looked at my daughter. Now, he'd been in there for like 2 or 3 days seeing this. And he looked at my daughter, and he starts crying, and he goes, "Samantha, I will," and the rattling chains, he said, "I will rattle every chain I have to." He said, "I promise." And he sat, and he like said it quietly to her, and I heard it. And he called, and dude, you could hear that doctor. You could hear him on that phone yelling. And he's like, "I know, sir. I know. And he goes, "You need to hear this." And he put it forward, dude. And my daughter was screaming. I have like 15 doctors in that room within about 2 hours time. It's like 15 of them in there. They still couldn't figure it out. And I said, "Well, you need to figure out." And eventually they did. And I'm only saying this because it was one of those times where you're realizing just how extreme it can be, and just how much you have to do as a parent to advocate. And even when you do, the limitations that are still there. And that sometimes, though, the answer is outside where you are. That we found an answer, and even from a place we didn't expect. We found an answer from a rehabilitation center that came in, and they said, "Well, this is what it is, and here's the meds." Never had a problem after that. So, but she was in extraordinary pain, and she was on all these narcotics, which were making her doped out of her mind, and all bound up inside. It was terrible. Stomach issues all the time, and she was zoned out, drooling. And that's not my daughter. you know, like that's not quality of life. So I went out and I did something, man. It's controversial, right? I went out. I live in Michigan. We have medical marijuana laws. I went and I got a medical marijuana card for my daughter. And I was giving her medicinal marijuana that was at that time illegal to do.
Was it helping?
Oh, dude, I only say it because it helped. It didn't just help a little. We had at the time, there was maybe 7 or 8 different meds on a shelf that every day she had to take numerous meds. We're talking major time narcotics, major time. And like narcotics because of narcotics because of narcotics. So like it was all cascading a thing. Every one of them, poof, gone. All of them. And one bottle that had this oil, Rick Simpson oil, in these little gel tab things, right? These little gel caps. And that was it. We went to the doctor after radiation and chemo. We went to the doctor, and these doctors are so used to seeing kids with cancer, dude. They know what it's like. They know that by the time 2 weeks in, that kid's probably barfing every day. That kid is skin on fire, probably a rash somewhere, major time itchy rash that burns. Skin is dry. They're not sleeping. They're not eating. They're losing their hair. They're depressed. And there's meds for all those.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and these kids come in. So the doctors come in, and our doctor she used to be at St. Jude's before this. So we come in, and the doctor looks at my daughter, and she didn't even ask. She just assumed. She said, Samantha, I'm so sorry that, you know, you're in pain right now because of the radiation. And my daughter like looked at her and like looked at me, and she's like, I'm not in any pain. And the doctor's like, well, you know, that your stomach hurts so bad. And she's like, what? She's like, my stomach doesn't hurt. And she said, well, you know, are you eating? And she goes, oh, I eat all the time. I've always got the munchies. And she's like, she did. She said that. She said she's always got the munchies. And
So
then
wait,
she's like, well, are you sleeping? And she said, yes.
Will they not give that to other kids? Like, I guess doctors won't give that to other.
No.
This is classically known that at least it helps somebody going through chemo get their appetite back, things like that. Like
they can't give it. It would have to be, there's certain medicines like Sativex and stuff like that would be good for it. But Sativex is not the same, and it's not whole plant.
Yeah.
Like, so you're only getting like, they're isolating things from it, and that's it. But there's a benefit to whole plant. So like Rick Simpson oil and other stuff. I learned a lot about this. I was reading tons of material at most.
I mean, once you see something relieves your daughter's pain of any kind, of course you're going to do that. I mean,
well, dude, let's put it this way. No pain, no stomach problems. Sleep. Are you sleeping every day? I even take naps. Really? You know, how are you doing at school? Oh, I'm doing great. How are you doing in therapy? Oh, they let me get out 2 weeks early.
She was staying in school through all this too.
Yeah, she was. And so like all this stuff, and the doctor asked her, the doctor said, well, why do you think that is? And she goes, she like looks at me, looks at the doctor, looks at me, looks at the doctor. And then she goes, Papa's meds. And she like that. And I'm like, my heart stops. I'm like, oh no, like I'm hosed. And the doctor's like, she's like, well, you keep taking Papa's meds. Yeah. She's like, but shh, this, because she didn't want, and she talked to me about it and said, like, you know, don't be an activist for this. Yeah. Because you don't know who's watching or who's listening. Yeah. They want to go in and
jerk will lock you up right. Yeah. Or something. So.
Yeah. Well, even call CPS.
Yeah.
Because I was giving her medicine that was illegal at the time. Like, I mean, it was legal to have the card, but she'd have to smoke joints. But by the end, she told me, I asked her at the end of her life, I said, what if you could give something? That's why I bring it up at all. Okay. I said, because it changed everything. And we had to go back. It's not as if it didn't cure it, you know, so I'm not saying that.
The pain.
It really dramatically, and emotions and food and sleep.
Made life tolerable.
Big time. And not just tolerable, enjoyable. And at the end, she told me, I said, if there's anything that you could tell kids and families with kids with cancer, what would you say? And she said, I think everybody who has cancer should take cannabis. She said, you know, she goes, I felt really bad when I'd go to the chemo and all those kids were so sad. And she said, they're all so sick and they're all so skinny. And she said, and they all are going through such a hard time and they're dying and they can't smile or laugh. And she said, and I would walk in and I was always so happy and I was always eating and doing everything else. And she said, and people always asked, you know, how are you so happy? And she goes, I know my family makes me happy. And I know life is awesome. You know, life is, I wish we could just live for a long time. And she goes, but the truth is, she goes, it's cannabis played a really big role. And I really hope that other people learn this and that they do this.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying. And I'm not, you know,
No,
I'll leave it at that.
a dad seeing his child suffering is going to do what a dad has to do for his child suffering.
I would have done anything, dude. I would have done anything. There's nothing, and nobody could have stopped me.
No, I don't blame you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, bro.
So now, what is the first spiritual event?
First spiritual event, in my opinion, would have been back when we were in. We went to England. We went to London for Make-A-Wish because she was the Make-A-Wish ambassador of the year. So we go to London, then we went to Cardiff, Wales for the Doctor Who museum. But when we were in England, we were on the Jubilee Bridge, and it was our first night there. Everyone was sleeping, but I couldn't. And she woke up, and we're like, she's like, let's just go out. It was really late, man. It's like 11. We go out there. It's freezing cold for one, and then it starts pouring rain, like big time rain. And so I give her my coat. I'm covering her up. I got blankets everywhere because if she gets sick, that's dangerous, man. So I'm like covering her up and I'm shaking. I mean, I'm like frozen. And she's, you know, looking up and saying, you know, you don't need to do this. I'm like, no, we do. It's okay. And I'm lying to her. I'm like, I'm fine. No, I'm not. I'm like, I'm going to get sick, dude. So we get up there to this bridge and we're talking and we're looking out at the River Thames, right? We're looking at that. And you got Big Ben, you know, all around us, you're bringing out into the sky. And she's talking to me about life. And we're talking about, you know, just kind of life in general. And I was saying something about God. And she goes, you know, I don't really know what's on the other side of things. She's like, but, you know, what if you're wrong? And, you know, what if you're not right about it? And I said, well, what do you think you should do no matter what, you know, because I was willing to listen to her. And she said, well, I think that we need to give it our best every day. And I think people should figure out what they love and dream really big thoughts, just dream bigger thoughts and then do what they want with what they love with everything they've got. Because you have one life and we're all going to die. And she goes, you know, you might die later. You don't even know how. And she goes, I just know I've got cancer. But she goes, the truth is you could technically die before me.
Yeah.
If there's an accident or something. And I said, like memento mori, because we had mentioned that phrase before. And she's like, I don't know what that means. And I said, actually, I think you know it more than anybody I've ever known. And that was the first time on that river, seeing the currents go by and thinking about time and everything, and being on a bridge overlooking it. And that was to me, that was a spiritual moment where I really started thinking about the idea of time, death, our mortality, the unknown, things that, you know, we may not believe in, but may be wrong about, and my willingness to admit that I might be wrong, and knowing that she was concerned about it, that was on her radar. And so
now you had an aunt also, correct? Right? That, if I remember, your aunt had given her a rosary or something along those lines.
No, it's my son's godmother.
Okay.
And it wasn't what happened was, no, that didn't affect anything. Like I didn't see that until the day we came back to church, which was a Christmas Eve. And I was just scrambling around looking for some. I didn't even know what I was doing.
Did I jump the story? I didn't mean to do that.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
We were given, well, because a priest came in, and that's the priest that we have now. A priest came, and that was the priest that she had when she was little.
So what made you go back to church that first time?
The godmother. So the godmother, so Ambrose, our middle child, Ambrose is an amazing guy. In the book, he plays a huge story and stuff, a huge part of the story. And But he, the kids were asking me these questions, and I'll fast forward and say these are the other spiritual things. 3 questions. My son gets in a debate with my wife about what he should do and not do, and I'm trying to explain to him to honor your mother and father. And I'm still an unbeliever, but I'm still using
Catholic principles.
I'm giving Catholic principles. And he's like, but why do I need to do that? Is it just your opinion?
How old is he?
At the time, he was like 11 years old.
Brilliant kid.
Or he was 10 years old, because he's 14 now. He's almost 15. So he'd been like 10, maybe, right around there. Do all my kids. I mean, they go to a school now where they're learning Latin and stuff. So like they're all really smart kids. So he asked the first question, why do I have to believe that? Is it just your opinion? It sounds nice, but who says so? And I'm like, So then about a week later, I'm talking to my daughter, and we're playing like Legos, and she's got a Barbie there. She's brushing the hair and stuff. And she's like, hey, Papa. And I said, what's that? And she goes, who built the builders? And I'm like, the builders? And I'm thinking maybe the Legos or something. She's like, no, of the universe. And she's like, dude, she's like 6 or 7, right? She's like even younger. And she's wondering who made the builders of the universe. So who's the builder of them? And I'm like God? And she goes, well, I don't know. She's like, who built them? She's thinking the universe was like people are sitting there hammering with nails, right, to make the trees or something. But she's thinking through the idea of causation. How did we get here? Who made this place? And then my son, and so I'm again kind of right. Increasingly, my growl is getting louder.
They're asking you the questions you should have been asking yourself the entire time.
I know. So then my son, he comes up and he's playing puppets. They're all playing puppets outside. And he goes, hey, he said, Papa, I want to tell you something. I said, okay. He's like, no, follow me. So I go upstairs, man. He's walking me upstairs. And I'm like, what's this about? We get in his room and he shuts the door and he's like, sit down. So I sit on his bed and he goes, Papa, I pray. And I'm like,
praying without telling you.
And I'm like, what? And he goes, I pray. And I'm like, to who? And he goes, God. And I'm like, well, does God like talk to you or something? And I kind of like made a joke
of it.
And he goes, no. And he has a little puppet. And he goes, it's not like God's like talking in my ear or nothing. And then he just kind of pauses and he goes, but I still think it's the right thing to do, Papa. And then he walked out the room and looks back at me and just nods and leaves. I'm just sitting in his bedroom on his bed by myself. And I'm like, time out. I'm like, everybody right now. I'm like, we're downstairs, family meeting. I'm like yelling at them, right? I'm pointing at them. Which one of you guys, where'd you learn?
I thought somebody put them up to it.
Oh, I thought they were, I thought somebody put it up to him. I was asking him, who taught him how to pray? Nobody did. I said, who's talking to you about the builders? What are you talking about? I was just wondering like about the world and stuff. I'm like, okay. So I asked my son, where'd you, he's like, I was just in an argument with Mama. I'm like, oh. And so we get in this conversation and they said, well, are we, and Ambrose again, he goes, Papa, are we Catholic? And he just straight up asks right there in front of everybody, Papa, are we Catholic? And I'm thinking like, I'm like, okay,
who's doing this?
You got to remember, I'm talking now to Athanasius, Ambrose, and Teresa Avila. Those are my
kids. Are we Catholic?
And I'm like, dude, not just Catholic, straight up doctors of the church. Yeah. And I'm like, ugh. So I'm telling him like, okay, technically you're all baptized. Okay. I'm like, you're all baptized. Your names are all really super duper Catholic, but we haven't gone. And so they said, well, what does it look like? So I'm trying to be sneaky sly because I don't want them to get into it. So I start showing them videos on YouTube of churches. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to show them where Nana goes or where Paps goes or where great grandma goes. They go to different Protestant churches. Mm-hmm. And I didn't show the actual church, but I showed their denomination, like a representative sample. And they were not into any of those, like at all. And then they said, well, where's Aunt Curly go? That's Phoebe. And I said, well, she's Eastern Orthodox. So I showed them and I'm thinking they're just going to get a good kick out of it, and they don't laugh at all. And they're staring at it. And that's when he said, well, what does a Catholic church look like? So I showed them and I showed them the Latin Mass because that's, to be honest, that's the main place I would go when I was a Catholic. So I showed them, said, well, this is what the kind of thing we used to do. So I showed them. Well, my son, Ambrose, again, says, well, can we go to mass this year to Christmas Eve? Because my godmother, whenever she sends a Christmas ornament every year that we would always put up, we always put the nativity up, and she would give us a new piece every year, right? And send a letter and always invite us to go to mass. So, and this is the one that gave us the little flower chaplet while we were in the hospital. And it was uninvited, but it played a big part. So she comes back in the story with this. Well, so we call. Now, the last time I ever talked to her before the hospital event was in a city called Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo is about an hour and 10 minutes from my home in Grand Rapids. So I'm like, yeah, we can go to the church over there. And I'm like, they don't know that that's over an hour away. And they don't know that it might be snowing. And if it's snowing, I ain't driving an hour to go to church. So I'm thinking I'm going to be getting away, with this from my kids. They're not going to be able to go. So I tell them, yeah, we'll go. We'll go. And I'm thinking I got them, and they're all happy. They all leave. Yeah, we're going to go Christmas Eve church. And they go and they leave. And my wife's like, I can't believe you said you'd go. And I said, oh, we're not going to go. I said, that's in Kalamazoo. And she goes, why? I said, well, that's where she lives. And she goes, no, she lives in Grand Rapids. Their church is right up the road. I'm like, no. I'm like, this is not happening. And so we go on Christmas Eve and we show up there, and I won't say that there's enormous life-changing symbolism in even the entrance where I'm walking up and what is happening. But I'll save that for the book, because it literally ties in. It makes my daughter almost a prophet.
Yeah,
I'm not even lying. I'm not meaning to exaggerate.
No, I can't wait for
it. It is totally prophetic. I don't even know how to describe it. So we get there to this church, and we walk inside, and I'm like thinking, it's just a regular church. All of a sudden, man, I hear the bells cling, cling, and I'm like, oh, that's a kind of nice bell. And then I hear a Gregorian chant, and I'm like, that's weird. I'm like, you're not, this is like a big church. I'm thinking, you don't hear that too often. And then all of a sudden, man, I'm smelling incense. And I'm like, wow, okay, that smells great. And then I'm looking at the boys, and they're all altar boys. There's no girl altar boys, right? They're just all altar boys, wonderfully vested. They're rolling around. I'm like, that's real weird. And then they get around, they're walking down the middle in the procession. And I look over and I make eye contact with the priest that I had 10 years before in Kalamazoo. He was moved to Grand Rapids. He's the only priest that ever came to pray for my daughter. And he came the same night that the godmother brought the beads.
Oh my God.
And I see him, and he sees me, and he knows he's the one who gave me the book Enthusiasm. That's him.
Yeah.
Because he was worried about me.
Because you're going off.
So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is nuts. So after mass, I'm like weeping. After mass, he tells somebody, he's like, you tell him to get back in the sacristy right now. And so I go back there, and he's looking at me. Yeah, and he's the New Yorker. And he's looking at me, and he's like, you are the last person I ever thought I would see in church. And I said, and you are the last priest that I thought I would ever see at this church. I said, I did not know you were here. And so we talked, and it was really great. And at the end, he said, welcome back, prodigal son. Now, I was not there in my heart. Okay, just being honest. I was not ready to come back. And I thought my kids wouldn't be, because I figured it'd wear off, because I knew they liked it, but they also liked the candy. Mm-hmm. Because he always has, every year he has people come up and get candy. And so I'm like, oh, after the mass, it's all over, right? So he doesn't do it during mass. But the thing is that I told the kids wanted to go the next week. And I said, no. I said, there's not going to be candy. They didn't care. And then eventually the last thing that led to us coming into the faith was we went 3 weeks. We bring them to Latin mass, because I thought if they went to a Latin mass, they wouldn't like it, because they wouldn't know what's going on. But I never factored in the idea that sometimes the alien and the strange and the extraordinary, that is actually almost entrancing to a kid. they're like, oh man, yeah, I went to a Latin mass. Oh, and they're like, what did he say? I don't know, but it looked awesome and it smelled great. Yeah. And but my son Athen, he was watching people go up for communion, And he's like leaning in, and he's like, Papa. I said, what's that? And he goes, what are they doing? And I'm like, they're going for communion. And he said, can we do that? No. Why? Well, you have to get, confession and stuff. Well, have you ever done that? Yeah. Why don't you go now? Because I haven't gone to confession. And he goes, well, I think maybe you should do that. I go home. My wife, first thing out of her mouth, Jeremiah, I think we should go to confession. First thing. So do my kids, I was done. I was done for
you
my
think,
kids.
So you're here thinking they're all plotting this on you, right?
Yeah.
You thought they were all plotting this, and this is really all just God working in them.
Yes.
To get to you.
Yes. And I have to say, and this is one of those things, because people have asked me, like, what are my thoughts about my daughter? Like, where is she? And stuff like that. And we pray as a family, we pray for the repose of her soul. We also pray that if she's in heaven right now,
intercede for us.
That she intercede for us. And we couple those together constantly. That's it. We pray for the repose of her soul, and we say, if you are there, pray for us. And I have to say, I personally believe that she's already there. Others are welcome to believe whatever they want about it. But to me, I believe she's already there, and I believe she's already there because people have taken the initiative to pray themselves that way and attribute to her various life-changing things that have happened to her intercession. And
I think there's a lot of saints in heaven that we don't know about.
Totally, 100%. And so, but that's how I treat it. And that's what happened with my daughter.
I don't want to blow the whole book on you.
Yeah, no.
So, you do have a book coming out on this. And listen, most parents are not going to go through something this heavy, right? But the thing about parenthood is there's crosses in every area of being a parent. So my mom has 9 kids, and there's always one who's going through something. So right now she's dealing with her son who's sick. We've had issues of drug use in our family where there's always going to be crosses in being a parent that are they always are going to seem unbearable. And it's like, if you don't have God to lean on in those times, man, like, I don't know how you got through those first few months without having a relationship with God. I mean, that had to be so hard.
Yes. Well, it's one of those things where God shines on the just and the unjust, right? The rain pours on everybody, and the light shines on the just and the unjust. God is extraordinarily gracious. I'm reminded of this every time I see people with really terrible beliefs and stuff that are really stupid, like some of the most ignorant beliefs in the universe. Like Sweet Daddy Grace is a guy who says that he was God. He's he was in New York, I think. He's out of you.
A lot of wackos over here.
He's a guy back in like the 1950s or something that said he was God and that he was he's grace. So every time in the Bible the word grace is there, that's him. So, and he had a cult, literally a cult, and yet he's able to survive and thrive and live an old age and function and do normal things. And I'm like, so you can have beliefs that are super dupe weird, super messed up, and go through terrible things, and God doesn't strike you dead. And not just that, but that you're able to go through hard times. And that, but it wasn't so much that, it was the aftermath. And that I think people they emphasize, like, man, it helped me get through that hard time. That's true. But when it's over and that child is gone, I remembered, I've been writing a chapter today, and it's been hard because that chapter is one of the many that really hits home, because there came a time where you reach a place where, for a while after she's dead, for a while, it's like you could still feel her. There was so many people that were around and who were influenced by her. I mean, we're talking in 2 days, I had 400 people in my home. So people who drove in from all over, even Canada and Mexico, Texas, Colorado, all over. So people came all over. They get here. And so, but that, and I'm surrounded by things. The balloons, the Get Well balloons are still in my room, right? They were at the time still in my room. So, I mean, things that were there are still present. But I remember this dude asked me one time in a live chat, because I used to host those all the time. And this guy, he asked me, he's like, do you still feel your daughter? And I remember my initial answer was just yes. And I think it was a survival mechanism, because the idea of saying no, I knew would be terrible. But that day came. And that day came when the balloons ran out of helium. And I remember I came into my office, man, and I look, and those balloons lasted a long time. And then one day, dude, it was just over. And they're on the ground. There's nothing. It's done. And I remember it started to hit me. I'm like, we take little things for granted. Like, I can tell if my wife was in the room in that door, I could sense that. Right? Like, if people are in the room, you wonder, somebody in here with me, you can hear the little movements upstairs, and you can distinguish between, is it my wife or my kids? You hear cries, that are out far enough away in a group of people, and you can still, as a parent, tell it's yours. There's senses that we've got as parents.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that was gone. There's no more pitter patter down those stairs. There's no more sound of her yawns in the morning. There's nothing. Everything is trapped in the film of time, whether on video, whether her clothing.
And she's forever 12.
She's forever 12. I've watched as her friends get older, and I would watch as her close friends. Dude, one's like 17 right now. I'm like, holy cow. It gives you perspective. She's talking to me about boyfriend.
I had a friend who passed when we were 17, and I bumped into his mom with my wife and kids a few years back, and I just saw her heartbreak, because I'm in my late 20s. This was maybe I was in my 30s, so I'm walking with my wife and children, and I just saw her heartbreak, because she had a son who would have been my age and would have probably been married. And your daughter is going to be forever 12. Forever. And when this book comes out, I really want people to read it. I cannot wait for it, because you're not even going into as much detail as I've heard you go into, and your daughter's conversion and some of the things your daughter says to you are so beautiful. And I'm really hoping that people, I don't care if you've heard your story before. Like, I'm excited to read those things that you can't get into in a 45-minute conversation. You know what I mean?
Well, and I felt badly going into some things, because you were saying you couldn't make it, and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, dude's gonna cry, man. I'm gonna have him in crumpled up.
I was crying before, and that's why
I'm like, he's gonna be crumpled up. He's done.
I'm just seeing that we're almost at 2 hours already.
No, you're good. It's buck 139.
Yeah. So
So but you wanted to bring up sedevacantism too.
So there was, when you were leaving, so you were Catholic, and you had gone off the rails into sedevacantism.
Yeah.
At one point, right? And I remember you and I joked around. Well, you actually made a comment about sedevacantists. They, like, because they don't have the authority structure of the church, that they can actually go off into things as wacky as believing in vampires and things like that.
Yes. So and this is one of those things, man, where, like, I get flack because I'll bring up some of the quacky stuff, and I only say that because, to me, that's not even remotely close to an emphasis. That's just a pitfall of a problem.
Yeah, it was kind of a comment.
There were people who really take seriously the idea of vamps, right? And vamping, they're vamping it out. They're like, oh yeah, they're like, no, you cannot change details in fictional stories of vampires. They got really upset about. They were all rankled in a bunch, and we're talking maybe 30 of them on Facebook from different areas in the country. They're not the same. They go to different ones. SSPV, a couple are CMRI, some are independent. Home Aloners tucked in, and they're all jumping in saying the same nonsense about Twilight was bad, not because it's a terribly written story, fact. But because they're like, oh no, the problem was that they were taking details and they were changing them. And you can't do that. And I'm like, and I thought it was a joke. My wife told me they were coming at her because she read it. And she told me, and I'm like, oh, it's got to be a joke. I get, oh no, it's not a joke. There's like a whole bunch of these people, and they're all on this thing just ripping into her. They're mad about it. And they're like, oh, this is terrible. You know, you don't even know what you allowed in your house, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, you know, but you just kind of sit there and you're like, whatever. And it's not just that. I mean, dude, people should go back and look at the weirdness to do with Archbishop Took, man, and say, like, most of the bishops and priests inside of Acontism, they don't come from the Lefebvre line. They don't come from any other line. The main line they come from is Archbishop Took. Archbishop Took was a kook, dude. Took was a kook. And he was secret consecrations, man. You know, having people, witnesses there who didn't know what form and matter and intention were. And to have a situation where you consecrate bishops who are not Catholic at all. And then one of those guys ends up saying, well, he ends up consecrating another guy as a bishop. And that dude goes on to co-found the solar temple.
Yeah, it gets to a point where it doesn't even resemble. I mean, look, it just goes to speak for where we are in the church right now, right? I mean, especially now, I think so many people are just so unstable with some of the things they're hearing from Rome that they're literally willing to cling to anything. I mean, I've seen people that I thought were of goodwill get led that way, you know, that they're just like, well, you know, but the thing about sedevacantism is it's a negative religion. So it's, instead of evangelizing and bringing people to the love of God, you're pulling people away from the church. That's your whole strategy of evangelization is you're in the faith. It's all about the Novus Ordo sect and the anti-pope this and anti, and it's like, when do you even like talk about the faith?
They're vampires.
Yeah.
They're literally living off of the life of another. They're sucking it for their life. That's it. Yeah. And it's one of these things, dude, where, you know, I said the same thing about atheism, that atheism will not survive if it's not for deconversion. That's it. Yeah. So like you either are using propaganda, state power, stuff like that. That's why they're so heavy on the power stuff, but also deconversions. And it's why they emphasize it so much. But whereas Catholics, you know, I think they overemphasize conversion stories, but at the same time, a life change is a life change. So grant that. But most of the people who are Catholic were born into it. So they're being born, right? You're raising children, you're teaching them, you're bringing them to mass. That's the primary way. And yet you look at sedevacantism, and I mean, it really is. It's a negative apologetic. Everything is. And there's, you know, the idea that they're going to go on the mission field, you know, and be like, oh yeah, we're out there doing missions and leading people to the love of God.
Yeah, no, like, they're sucking. They're doing something very similar to what, I mean, even Pentecostals do and stuff like that. And they take advantage of people who don't know their faith that well. And they're sucking Catholics away because a Catholic wasn't actually catechized growing up.
Well, it's what they're doing the same thing. I'm reading a book right now by Philip Jenkins about mystics and messiahs, because I'm going to continue my series, Meaning of Catholic, on enthusiasm, but pick up where Knox left off in the late 19th and 20th and 21st centuries. And he goes through and he's talking about the history of cults in America. And the first anti-cult crusade, the biggest one that was like kind of formed and made what every other one ever came around after that, what it was like, was the crusade against Catholicism. And the way that they talked about it, the techniques that they used in describing it and all these things, so much of it is the same kind of apologetic that so many in the Sedevacantist group are using, you know. So like, but you know, and by the way, just to make clear, because I said, you know, a guy made a bishop who started a cult. It wasn't just a cult. It was literally a death cult. They Jonestown themselves. There was like 70 people who killed themselves. And it was co-founded by one of these bishop guys. Also the Palmarian, the church, right, that has the Pope, that one, same thing, same archbishop that did it, same guy. So, I mean, you could talk about the kookiness, but at the end of the day, to me, the primary problem is the same thing that St. Francis de Sales sees in the problem with the schismatics, the Protestant schismatics in Geneva and in the Chablais, is that he says that no matter what it is, if they talk about the interpretation of a Bible verse, if they talk about the canon, if they talk about rules of faith, if they talk about their practices, if they talk about holy orders and where they go to church, each and every one of those, he drives back to the same exact thing. And that is by what authority?
Mm-hmm.
And if what the Sedevacantist doesn't get, and this is unfortunate, right? What they don't get is that they are a kind of sola scriptura, but they have simply added to the canon. The methodology is the same. So they say, well, canon law says, okay, scripture says. Well, but encyclicals say, yeah, scripture says. It's you, your monocle, and a holy text that you say is the ultimate authority.
Making and you are Pope.
Yes. And if you have a problem, and this is as simple as it gets, if you have a problem, and it's why it's indefinite, why you can't play with this. Jesus, one of the only times he even talks about church, he says, if you got a problem with your brother, confront him. If it doesn't work, bring 2 or 3 witnesses. That way every word can be confirmed. Confirmed to who? Oh, the next step. If he doesn't listen, bring him to the church. That's where the witnesses come in. Mm-hmm. If the church makes a verdict and the person doesn't listen, then treat him like a heathen and a tax collector. To the Sedevacantist, as well as to the Protestant, same thing. We have a debate over what certain passages mean. I have a problem with my brother. He has a problem with me. So I then say, well, okay, we have witnesses. Okay, we brought in our witnesses. What next? We got to go to the church. And they're like, I'm like, I know where to go. And they're like, no, we can't go there.
Yeah, they don't have a church.
Because they don't have
They have so for them, they have their church, but that's not the church. It's
if the buck can't stop with a living person, with a living entity that can make a verdict. And they say, well, but they're not out there making verdicts right now. And you go, but you have to be able to say they. You don't even have they.
Yeah.
So you don't even have the mechanisms by which that could even possibly happen. So you can complain that my side, meaning, with the church and stuff, that the church is not doing what you think the church should be doing. What do? You are literally in a 2,000-year line of people who've made the same complaint. The difference is, for 2,000 years, every single person, every group that said things like that the church has unchurched itself, Rome has lost the faith, we don't have a pope, every single one of those people, they're in books now of schismatics. There is no they're still legit. No, they are not. There are zero.
They started their own thing, and they're totally separate.
They said they were the true remnant. We're the real remnant. We're the only ones. And it always starts simple. And this is the warning. This is a serious warning, dude, to people listening. They start with simply saying that the church has gotten worldly.
When has the church not been worldly?
Yeah, that's where they start. They say the church has gotten worldly. Eventually, they start saying that their co-religionists are so worldly that they can no longer commune with them. And then they start to say that it's not just a problem of communion, because that really follows on, you would think, follows on like a theological idea that those people are heretics or whatever, and you can't commune with them. But oftentimes it's easier to say, well, like, I don't commune with them, but yeah, they could still be saints, but I won't ever have communion with them. When you do that, though, and you get to that place, eventually both sides will start, the church will start saying some mean things, and people will start saying some mean things, and it goes back and forth. And it doesn't matter what happens first. If they leave, if there's secession or schism, it doesn't matter. Functionally speaking, you have introduced a new Christianity.
Yep.
That's it. Yeah. And that normally comes along with saying that you're the remnant, that the church has unchurched itself, that you are the only ones left, and that it's the end times.
Yeah.
They go together.
The story of Jesus falling asleep in the boat is so significant for even our times right now. Like, he's asleep in the boat. He's not dead. He's not, he knows what's going on. God knows what's going on. You don't know better than him. Yeah. Just trust that God knows what's going on. He'll do something to purify the church when he wants to.
Yeah.
As of right now, if you just stop paying attention to what's going on in Rome and live your faith out at the parish level and in your home, you'll be fine. You don't need to worry about every single article and life site puts out. You don't need to watch every single thing that the Vatican says. Just live your faith and try to be a saint and go to mass and stay in the sacraments.
Well, and you'll hear it, right? You'll hear, because they're addicted to something, and every one of these enthusiastic groups are always addicted to this, and it is ignoring the underlying problem, right? Of no authority, and putting and I call them monocle men, right? They put on the monocle. I'm going to look now at all. I see the church has done this, but let me go and look at all the sources myself. And so like, or I don't think that the conclave was valid. I'm like, well, maybe they should have called you. Like, boy, we'd probably be way better if they would have.
Well, you have people that actually, like the people that think that Benedict is still Pope. I'm like, that would make Benedict infinitely worse than Francis. But
yes.
It would make him infinitely worse. How could you say that? Like, that would mean he's sitting by watching a anti-pope destroy the church, what you say, and he's not saying a word, and he literally could say something whenever he wants. No, I'm sorry, I'm not buying.
Well, and they always want to argue a text or an example. And I say, so does the Protestant. Every time the Protestant sits there and says, well, but this Bible verse over here, or this passage over here, or look at the wicked things you guys did over here.
Proof texting, whether it's a council, you're proof texting, whatever you decide is the authority other than the actual authority that God instituted.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, and the idea of this is that they can say that all they would like, and in fact, on many of the claims, they could actually be true, just like a Protestant could. However, that debate is taking place outside of the bosom of the church. Mm-hmm. So to a Catholic, we would look at that and go, well, and they'd say, well, we're part of the church. We are the true church. And I'd say, well, the only way to know that you're part of the bosom is you're connected to the head.
Yep.
That's it. So let's go to Rome. And they're like, no. And you're like, okay, so we're back to that.
It really is the only, I mean, Jesus literally left us the rock.
The vicar,
dude. Can't do anything about it.
He's the vicar. It blows my mind. And here's the thing, man. The last thing I'll say. So people get upset about this and like, you're calling us Protestants. And I say, no, I'm not. There's a difference between being a Protestant and sharing the same underlying assumptions that a Protestant does. Mm-hmm. I said, that's kind of like saying, because that would be like a sickness and a symptom, right? I said, so it's kind of like you guys, when you say that and they get mad and like, oh, because they got mad at me on Twitter. And they're like, oh, it's so cliche, dude. We've heard this so many times. Don't you realize how stupid that makes you look? And I'm like, no, what makes it stupid is that you saying that me describing the disease and the symptoms of the disease that is shared. And I called it Martin Lutheritis, which is why they said it was, I'm calling him Protestant. And I said, no, I said, the problem is that's like saying that if I say that somebody with ALS has Lou Gehrig's disease, that I'm saying that they're a New York baseball player. That's as stupid as that. Yeah. Like, if you, just because I call it Martin Lutheritis doesn't mean
you're Lutheran.
Doesn't mean you're Lutheran. And it just means that and the fact
it's
is
the same symptom. It's the same idea that, well, I know better.
And those symptoms were around before Luther. Mm-hmm. In fact, I could call them Adam and Eve-itis.
Yeah.
I could. And say, you take for yourself the authority to say what is law and what you need to abide by. And we could say it's Adam and Eve-itis. Mm-hmm. I could say any sinner ever. Yeah. But it was, don't eat the fruit. Well, are you sure? I'm putting on my monocle. He did say this and that. Like, it's anybody who sinned. But I said, I took that position in part because I knew that it would draw that out. Yeah. And I know that's terrible to say, but it literally played into my hand because the whole idea is that there's an underworld and that there's a facade on top that says we're Catholic. Look at the liturgy, look at the confession, look at the rites, look at all this stuff, look at our lives. We're praying a rosary. And I said, there's an underworld though, and that underworld is hidden. And the only way to get it out is by reducing it to absurdity and by it self-revealing or by impossibility of the contrary. And I've used a reductio ad absurdum, impossibility of the contrary, or the transcendental argument. And I allowed them to self-reveal by simply predicting what people say and then making
Yeah,
it
they all
such
pick
that
the
I
same route.
knew it would happen.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you can't help yourself. You guys are insatiable, you know?
So, all right, Jeremiah, we're almost at 2 hours.
We're good. Yeah.
So I definitely want to do this again, though. Like
Yeah.
I could talk to you for 7 hours on that.
Yeah.
So let's just, I know you're busy, you're writing your book. Maybe in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we'll touch base again and we'll do this again, man.
Sounds good, dude. Yeah.
Sounds good.
I wish you the best, man. You're a
too,
cool
Jeremiah.
guy. You're a cool
awesome.
guy. And I like the idea of more casual shows. You know, I think, you know, maybe one day you'll be able to like take a topic and, you know, run for 10 minutes with it. You know, I know
And
Tim
just see where
does
the
that.
conversation goes.
Yeah, and then just see how it goes. You know, Tim kind of does that. He'll do like a 10-minute thing, and then we'll just
And then
talk,
it goes where it
you
goes.
know.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
but
I like that. I like to honestly, I mean, I wanted you to tell your story just because I knew I had family members that never heard it. But next time we talk, let's just talk.
yeah.
Right.
And look, man, yeah, the book, please pray for me about the book because it's almost done. I told my wife I was so happy because I predicted that I'd be able to get it done by the 24th. I might be wrong. Maybe I'm working fast, but I told her, I said, I feel so good because for the first time in years since I started that I can literally look and say, this is actually going to be done. And like soon, like for real, like I'm writing every day. I'm moving forward bit by bit by bit, boom, boom, boom. And the blanks are starting, like the chapters that were empty are filled up. And now I got to go to another one, filled up, got to go to another one. And I said, it feels so good. I ain't stopping. So the book's coming out. Super happy about
Coming
it.
out on Our Lady of Victory.
Yeah, that at first, yes, it'll be over there. And then after that, we'll see. You know, I want to get it out before anything happens with my sister. And please pray for her. So the book,
absolutely,
my sister, you know, and of course, just everything else going on with me of Catholic 1 Peter 5, my work with them. So
and pray for everybody going through suffering and anybody who's has a spouse that may not be in the faith. Because I know the hardest thing is when you have a husband or a wife and you guys aren't on the same page. I've seen the turbulence that brings in the house, man. It's a rough one. So
yeah.
We'll leave it off there. Jeremiah, thank you so much for coming on, man.
All right, bro. No problem. Thank you.